Thank you all for coming back. We continue with panel discussion 2 with the theme Standards and Evaluations Promoting Green Products or Services, will be chaired by Professor Jun Arima, Project Professor of the University of Tokyo Graduate School of Public Policy. And we have 5 panelists for this session. Mr. Tatsuo Ogawa, Executive Officer of Panasonic Holdings Corporation. Mr. Xavier Denoli, Executive Vice President of Schneider Electric, who is joining us online. Mr. Peter Bakker, President and CEO of World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Ms. Reiko Hayashi, Director and Deputy President of Bank of America Securities Japan. And Mr. Shinichi Kihara, Deputy Director General for Technology and Environment, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. The panel discussion starts with the opening remarks from the chair, Professor Jun Arima. So please have a seat. Thank you very much. Professor Arima, please.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jun Arima, Project Professor at Graduate School Public Policy, GRASP. Now, as you know, the global community is making commitment to ambitious climate mitigation goals, and to this end, concrete actions and implementations of announced policies and measures is crucial. Countries are implementing various policies such as carbon tax, emissions trading, as you have heard in the previous session, regulations for energy efficiency, and subsidies or finance for green products and technologies. The combination of effective policies will lead to emission reduction, certainly. Policies such as carbon pricing and emissions trading systems can be quantitatively measured in price, while others cannot. And the former widely recognized as so-called explicit carbon pricing, and the latter as implicit carbon pricing. And OECD is making vigorous efforts to compare explicit and implicit carbon pricing through its initiative called Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches. And not only governmental policies, but also voluntary actions from private sector are also an important aspect of certain action. And carbon pricing is regarded as an indicator for measuring policy intensity or strength towards climate mitigation. And in the G7 Climate, Energy and Environment Ministers communique in 2022, on the other hand, there was also an emphasis on the so-called emission or carbon intensity. In order to achieve net zero globally, it is essential to produce and introduce products with a minimal or negative carbon footprint and reduce emission intensity as fast as possible, taking into account trajectories towards net zero. And policy intensity could be recognized as an effort to future reduction, while carbon or emission intensity shows the results of the efforts up to now. The mainstream discussion today is focusing on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions throughout the value chain of certain organization or entity. And it is certainly important to accelerate such efforts. However, the perspective of how much a certain organization or entity contributes to the mitigation beyond its value chain is lacking there. For example, suppose a heat pump manufacturer contributes to reducing global emissions by replacing gas heating with a widespread use of heat pumps, air conditioners. The contribution to reduce the emission compared to the use of gas heating should be evaluated properly. So active discussion on the mitigation contribution are emerging now in the private sector. Today, we will first listen to the idea of Panasonic green impact, and we will deepen our discussion following the keynote presenter. So now, without further ado, let's give a floor to CTO of Panasonic, Mr. Tatsuo Ogawa. He's going to present the idea of Green Impact Initiative. So, Mr. Ogawa, floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Arima, your kind introduction. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tatsuo Ogawa. I'm in charge of technology and Panasonic as a group CTO. It's my great honor to have this opportunity here today. And it's my pleasure to talk about our basic thinking about the environmental management in Panasonic. Next, please. Next, please. Let me go over the brief introduction of our company. Under Group CEO Yuki Kusumi, we changed our company organization this year to holdings companies. That consists of 7 business companies shown in here. And I think that one of the biggest uniqueness here in Panasonic is a wide variety of the products and service, and a wide variety of the customer and the customer interface. So this is the era of the diversity, so that we'd like to have a unique position to utilize this diversified customer basis and also the product basis in near future, I think. Next, please. And our founder, Konosuke Matsushita, claimed that set the management policy almost 100 years ago that says Panasonic has been committed to the progress and the development of society and the well-being of people through its business activities. Means from the very beginning, we have committed not only the well-being, but also the sustainability to continue the company running. Now, I like to point out the 2 things. One is the tap water philosophy that Konosuke Matsushita said. That basic idea here is a try to produce the goods as much as possible that people need, so that eliminate the poverty in that era. I'd like to say that today, energy is the kind of the same situation. Safer, clean, and also the cheap energy is necessary to widely spread and use very conveniently, like a tap water philosophy in energy is one of our goals of the sustainability policy. And our founder also said that not only the material matters, but also the mind and spiritual things. Satisfaction is the key in a good, ideal social life that we are aiming. Next, please. But this year, our CEO, Kusumi, asked us that, are we okay now? That means we think that we have been leaving from the right pathway to the ideal society, but in the very bad way towards the catastrophic way in terms of the environmental issues. So he tried to ask us to return to the basic management policy and management philosophy of Konosuke Matsushita that said that the realization of an ideal society with affluence both in matter and mind is our basic thinking. So, in that sense, environmental issues like climate change is the highest and the first priority for us for the sustainable life. Next, please. So that this year we revealed that our environmental vision, so-called Panasonic green impact. There are 3 circles you can show in the green circles, and the inner circle is our own emission. We said that the own impact, that is, GHG protocol scope 1, 2, 3. That means our own value chain emission. We'd like to reduce and make it neutral until the 2050. Today, we have 110 million ton emission in our scope 1, 2, and 3. And outside of that, we have a great contribution for our customers to avoid their emissions. And that so-called avoided emissions that we'd like to discuss later in a panel discussion, and also Professor Arima and also the Peter Bakker-san and also the Mr. Nakatani-san mentioned about the avoided emissions several times in this session. But we think that this contribution for the mitigation of the emission in customers' value chain has a great potential. And we think that we'd like to set our target 100 million ton reduction in that area. And plus, we'd like to create the new avoided emission through the new technologies and businesses like a hydrogen or dams or that kind of new one, 100 million ton. So totally, almost 300 ton. That is equivalent to the approximately 1% of the current total global emissions as an emission factor as of 2020. It's a very tough challenge, but this is our green impact, Panasonic Green Impact new policy. Next, please. Before I'm going to jump into the avoided emission discussion, I'd like to go over GHG protocol briefly. Maybe you're pretty much familiar with this one, but we have scope 1, direct emission, the scope 2, indirect emission using like electricity or something, and scope 3, upstream activities and downstream activities total. So we have a great responsibility to reduce total this scope 1, 2, and 3. And yes, we Panasonic gonna become neutral until 2050, and especially scope 1 and 3 until 2030, we already revealed. But in our company's activities, we have another potential, the opportunity to enhance the carbon neutral. That is avoided emission that I'd like to talk a little bit later. Next, please. Next, please. So now we are under getting more and more pressure of disclosure, the data or status of the environmental issues or carbon emissions. But at the same time, we'd like to see on the opportunities. Number one, GHG protocol allows companies to measure the CO2 emissions associated with their business activities. That means on their value chain, but it does not include how to measure the contribution to the society through business. That means our customers, contribution. So avoided emission is a contribution to the customer's CO2 reduction, and it does not offset our own emission and not double count with our own emissions. But we need to think that the unified standard has not been established and its social recognition is low, so that if we'd like to reach to the consensus of the avoided emission as an opportunity, fair rules that enhance desirable business activities that accelerate the carbon neutral efforts and try to get the good investment, then pile up with the company values, that kind of company who is doing a great job properly in the industry. So social awareness of their mitigation contribution is a kind of important, I think. Next, please. So now in a electronic and electronic area, we try to set an international standardization of the avoided emission in IEC. In IEC 63372, Technical Committee 111, carbon footprint of product GHG emission reduction, avoided emission from the EE product and system point of view. As you can see in the below schema, the basic concept is kind of very simple. We'd like to set the baseline of the lifetime emissions. And if we can produce the new energy saving products, so the baseline could lower. So that should be the contribution of the company, avoid the emission in a customer's value chain. So this means that outside of the organization by direct use of e-product, service, or system, or emission avoided by the services using the new digital technologies, which are AI, IoT, digital twin, etc. So that I think that this avoided emission has a lot of variety and a lot of possibility, potential, I think. Next, please. So this is the last page of my presentation. So we think that we need to make an initiative for the migration contribution. So key here is by creating a cross-industry coalition to preparing an environment in which company contribution to the decarbonization are properly evaluated, and then that promote the corporate efforts like innovation or development, and create mechanisms to accelerate the carbon neutral society. So I'd like to emphasize 3 points here: cross-industry consensus on an indicator for the contribution to decarbonization, and global dissemination and rule-making, and finally promoting the spread of products, systems, and services that can contribute to the avoided emissions. That's all my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ogawa, for excellent presentation. And you have presented very important concept, avoided emissions, and also the last 3 key points, cross-industry collaboration, and also global dissemination and rulemaking, and promote spread of environmental friendly goods and technologies. All are very much important. So now let's listen to a perspective of 4 prominent panelists. First, I have to give the floor to Mr. Peter Barker, President and CEO of World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So, Mr. Barker, could you please make a comment, in particular for the proposed concept of avoided emissions? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and well done, Ogawa-san, on presenting the case for avoided emissions. Let me try and fly over it from a slightly higher level. I think business responds to 3 things. One is the risks that is involved in their business and business model. The second is revenue growth or opportunities in the market. And the third one is capital market giving them incentives in terms of providing more finance or better stock price performances. Traditionally, I think the conversation around climate change and business has been approached from a risk point of view. Resilience in supply chains, the need to reduce emissions, and that's where concepts like Scope 1, 2, and 3 in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol have been developed. That work continues to be extremely important, because whatever the motive is for business to act, we must not lose sight of the need to aggressively, radically reduce emissions globally. And it doesn't matter which methodology we use, we need action, we need accountability, and we need to reduce emissions. The big drive in the emission reduction scheme at the moment is, how do we actually measure Scope 3 consistently throughout value chains? Scope 1 and 2, the methodologies are robust. Most companies, at least companies that I've seen here, are all capable of measuring it. Scope 3 still needs further work. And so there's at the moment a big push in many industries actually to understand what is the methodology and more importantly, what is data exchange protocol. But that still basically focuses on what can we do in the company and across the value chain to reduce emissions. The second point, and that's the point that Ogawa-san was making so eloquently, is companies have the ability to put in their R&D and in their product development priorities of where they're going to bring out the next type of products. And what is really interesting is the question, how do we prioritize those developments to align with the need to reduce emissions? And that is where the concept of avoided emissions will play such a critical role. If a company has a choice between two products to develop and the avoided emissions in one product is much higher than the other, then a company should and will make the choice for the avoided emissions investments. So the concept is critical and is not captured in Scope 1, 2, 3 from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol yet. There's also a flip side to that point, and that's the point that Ogawa-san made. There is not a standardized, agreed methodology and a set of metrics on how we measure avoided emissions. So at the moment, you see companies make all kinds of promises around avoided emissions, but not all of these promises will actually lead to the emission reductions that we all need. I always give a very simple example, and I hope nobody takes offense, but I have a Toyota Prius. On a quiet day, I can get 25 kilometers out of a liter of petrol in the Prius. On a day that I'm stressed or in a hurry, I only get 10 kilometers out of the same car. And that is by me as user deciding on how do I drive the automobile. So the avoided emission could be 25 kilometers, where a normal car maybe gets 6 or 7, or it could be 10. And the question is, how do we include that into the metrics? So we need to do work to understand what is the methodology and the metric we're going to use, but then avoided emissions, in my mind, will be a critical element. And then the third driver that I said is capital market incentives, and I'm sure you will comment on that as well. Capital markets will look at risk and will want to monitor Scope 1, 2, 3, but capital markets are often more interested in what is the growth potential of a business. And the growth potential of a business requires to look into the avoided emissions that a company has in its product portfolio or in its investment plans. For those of you who were also in the TCFD summit on Wednesday here in Tokyo, there one of the investment houses said the correlation between avoided emissions and green revenue is very easy to understand for an investor and as such easy to implement in a capital allocation or valuation model. So I think we must collectively work on reducing the emissions. Companies can make choices on where to invest based on avoided emissions. And if we find the right metric to standardize that, and as Ogawa-san said, across sectors, then capital markets begin to price that in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bakker, for your excellent intervention. And you have pointed out a very important elements, that is, the importance of Scope 1 to 3, as well as importance of avoided emission for opportunity for product development or R&D. And also you have even pointed out the importance of capital market and the role of finance. And I think at that point will certainly be more elaborated by Mrs. Hayashi. But before doing so, let's give the floor to Mr. Xavier Denoli, Senior Vice President, Sustainability Development, Schneider Electric Strategy and Sustainability. So, Mr. Denoli, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's a great honor for me to be speaking to you. I'm speaking to you from France right now. So my great honor to be participating to the panel. I will say a few words which are, I think, well in line with the previous two interventions, which is basically to say a few words about Schneider Electric. And as the name says, we are completely involved, let's say, in the electrical power sector through a number of businesses. So I will try to give a very quick overview of what we have been doing over the past few years. Of course, in terms of decarbonization of our own activities, direct and indirect, scopes 1, 2, and 3, and also the fight that we also, or the flag that we're also carrying to defend the point on avoided emission and this idea of a coalition that was brought together earlier by Ogawa-san was really in line with our views. So let me say a few words, please, next slide, about Schneider, for those of you who don't know what it is. Basically, Schneider Electric, as mentioned, is involved in electrical power in all of its businesses. And our mission is to leverage all the capacities of digital and software in order to bring to our customers sustainability and efficiency. For many years, Schneider has been really the flag holder on electrical efficiency. We call that energy efficiency. And gradually, of course, people came to realize that operating with electrical systems in carbonized network not only had a benefit on the energy bill, but also a great impact on the carbon emissions. Next. So Schneider is operating globally. So we have really a global vision of what is happening across continents, originating from Europe, 130 roughly 1,000 people across the company, and we operate in all markets. So we are in a very good position if you want to be able to not only witness the evolution of what our customers are telling us on the grounds of decarbonization, but also well positioned to be able to influence those bodies that actually work on standardizing and given the direction of decarbonization. As you can see, our two main businesses are energy management for, let's say, almost 80% of it, and industrial automation. So we also touch on process industry, where the motto there has been for years and years to keep the machines running, so to reduce the downtime, but of course, increasingly to be able to make better use of the energy which is available to them. Next. So our play, and this is the way we see our contribution and our commitment to sustainability by and large. We play on both sides of the equation. On the left-hand side, you see that we are working super hard to continue to lead ESG by example in our ecosystem, which means, and I will detail a little bit more, that we not only, of course, work on environment, which is the topic of today, environment being climate and resources, but also we try to balance our activities across the whole spectrum, including the social impact of everything which is around us and the governance attached to it. And then in the second part of my small presentation, I will tell you a little bit of what we do and how we approach the partnering with our customers. And basically the way to present it simply is to say, we are a resource, our company portfolio is a resource available to Schneider Electric customers to move into their decarbonization journey, their own decarbonization journey. And this is where the topic of avoided emissions comes into play. Next. So in our own ecosystem, and I'll go very fast, this is to give you a flavor of the commitments that we have made. So the name of the game here is action. The name of the game is transparency. So say what you do, say what you will do, and what you see here is our main extra financial activity dashboard that we communicate every quarter to all the stakeholders, including finance, obviously, and where Schneider wants to be on all the dimensions across ESG by 2025. So we give clear ambition, numeric ambitions, and then we drive plans, of course, to be able to transform our company. So transform the way we work with our suppliers by pushing and incentivizing them to reduce their own emissions in their own operations, by pushing our suppliers again to use more green material. This is what we call green material, are actually materials which are, let's say, CO2 friendly, and also that are resource friendly, because we live in a finite world. And of course, CO2 is the main topic. There's also the resource topic, which is just as important. and that type of thing. So this is how our dashboard, the way we transform our company to stay on top on the ESG with our customers, suppliers, employees, and other partners. Next. So for our customers, what we do next, please, is this is the approach that we have. Next one, please. The approach that we propose to our customers, let's say the value proposition to support our customers on their climate or strategy to be able to decarbonize their own operations. It's basically a very simple 3-step approach. Strategize, which means basically you cannot reduce what you don't know, right? So a whole work around consulting approach with the customers that we have or that we approach to measure the baseline, so to know where they are themselves on their own emissions, direct and indirect, to prepare a roadmap for decarbonation. So this one is really an important step to be able to say what are the capabilities that the company is going to equip itself to be able to decarbonize as fast as possible. And of course, equally important is to have the program, the resources, and the governance, and the commitment and transparency, as I mentioned before, to move into that direction. Second piece is about digitization, and this is where we leverage, of course, the technologies available for everyone today. Basically, to be able to measure by putting as many sensors as possible to measure the state of the installations that we are looking at, and to be able to, of course, identify the bigger buckets and the saving opportunities which exist. And finally, the decarbonize phase is to use first a number of levers. The first one is to electrify everything that can be electrified. That's step one. Energy efficiency by reduction of the energy use. It does not mean necessarily reduce the activity, but do more with what is available. Replace the energy source. This is the area which is absolutely critical for our collective success in the long term, is to be able to operate with decarbonized energy sources at a big scale. So many customers are looking for solutions to be able to have their own renewable solutions already, but this is only the starting point. Ultimately, that would be a very important element to be able to do that. And engage the value chain, which is basically, as I mentioned, in the case of Schneider for itself, engage the suppliers, the partners, and also our own design teams to be able to reduce the emissions. Next, please. So these are our commitments. This is fairly standard. What you can see in the middle are our scopes 1, 2, and 3 inside the big rectangle. So we've made commitments well in line with the SBTi science-based target commitments to say well below 2 degrees elevation. So for our complete value chain, and our objective is to be net zero on our total value chain by 2050, which is a huge challenge. And to give a little bit of metric, compared to the Panasonic example earlier, a company like Schneider would have a carbon footprint, let's say, of roughly 70 million tons today for scopes 1, 2, and 3. The point that we work hard at, and we have made also a commitment, and this is one of the topics of discussion today, is on what we call the saved and avoided emissions. That's the one on the right. Our commitment to the markets, to our customers, is that we have committed to reduce or to save and avoid 800 million tons of CO2 over the period 18 to 25, which equates, thanks to the portfolio of Schneider Electric, so the solutions we bring to the market, a pace of roughly 100 million tons per year. And the way to do that is really by continuing to innovate in our portfolio. So what we sell, let's say, to our customers, to be simple, innovative solutions that will be able to displace the current state of order of things, let's say the normal practice, by bringing solutions which are going to be much more energy efficient and therefore avoid or save potential emissions. Next. So this is the way we clarify that. What do we talk when we talk about these emissions? We talk about comparing a reference situation, which is basically the state of the art of what has been done on the market for quite some time, compared to new and innovative solutions that could be brought through the engineering of Schneider Electric solutions. And we measure the difference between the two. If you want to click one more time, I think there is a small animation. one more. Okay, so this is what we call the saved and avoided emissions. The difference between the two is whether we are operating on a greenfield project or on an existing project. So it's an important notion as well to say that it's not only all about new construction or new projects, but there is a huge effort that can be done to reduce the emissions of the installed base, the existing buildings, the existing installations, etc., that can also benefit from having, let's say, more up-to-date innovation to reduce the emissions. One example I can give, and you have a few here at the bottom of the slide, I'm not going to comment them all, but for example, for those of you who are familiar with what variable speed drives would be, this is for electric motor control. Thanks to the technology of variable speed drives, we can drive on average 30% energy efficiency compared to a traditional direct online starter. And the electric motors is one of the biggest consumers of electricity around the world. So imagine if we were capable of having speed drives solutions on everything, it's a major potential for reduction. Another one, of course, is to switch, that's the second one, is to switch the current purchase of our customers from carbonized electricity to clean electricity when available through power purchase agreements, for example. So this is how we define saved and avoided emissions at Schneider. And once again, our ambition is to make sure that we can measure, let's say, prove our point on a magnitude of roughly 100 million tons per year. And that's our contribution to it. And we very much welcome the idea that was put forward together to participate to a coalition to get that type of approach, let's say, recognized so that we can, let's say, leverage this and accelerate the contribution that companies like Schneider, like Panasonic or others can have through their engineering and portfolio to the decarbonization of others. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. Donnelly. And then it is very much encouraging that we had a very similar idea from France and also from Japan, either saved emission or avoided emission, or even scope 4, various namings emerging. But we have heard up to now the perspective of business organization, WBCSD, and also specific companies, Panasonic and Schneider. And as pointed out by Mr. Barker, the role of financial institution is also very much important. So now let's listen to the perspective of Mrs. Reiko Hayashi, Director and Deputy President, Bank of America Securities, Japan. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. My name is Reiko Hayashi, Deputy President of Bank of America. BofA Securities, it's a security arm and then also investment bank arm of Bank of America here in Tokyo. I have been in capital markets more than 3 decades already, and then I have been involved in ESG around 7-8 years so far. And then as part of that, I'm a member of a couple of Japanese government working groups for sustainable finance, such as expert panel of sustainable finance set by FSA or GGX Council by Cabinet Office. And then also, I'm a board member of International Capital Market Association, which have around 600 members of financial institutions or regulators, and setting bond principles for ESG themed bonds, such as green bond or social bond or etc. I'd like to give you an update on financial city, what kind of initiatives financial institutions have done so far on sustainable finance or to promote decarbonization in the world. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Baska. Thank you. Thank you. In summary, we have done so many things responding to the requirement by the society and then also the market to support sustainable finance, but still we are going or still we have many things to do. But I'd like to touch upon a little bit about the how rapidly ESG-themed bond market has grown for the past several years. It started just 10 years ago. Actually, 2014, we saw the first green bond in the international capital markets, and then ICMA set up green bond principle that time. So still, only 8 years have passed since the first green bond principle was established. And then since then, we have established green bond principle, social bond principles, sustainability bond principles, sustainability linked bond principles, and then recently, ICMA established Climate Transition Finance Handbook to support transition finance in December 2020. So we have many things to do to support transition finance. It hasn't been perfect yet. And then this year, last year, the ESG bond deals, the issue amount of ESG bonds reached out to $1 trillion US. It's around 13% of the total global bond market. So still 1/8 in the total global bond markets. And then this year, the market shrank a lot due to the current geopolitical tension and then also higher interest rate. But still, ESG bond market outperformed so far because investors or issuers are so keen to promote this sustainable finance. It's a great thing. And then thanks to the, thanks to the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, FSA, and then also Ministry of Environment in Japan, the government established also Climate Transition Finance Handbook in Japan as well. And then since then, we are seeing more issuers and more investors showing interest in transition finance so far. And then we are more understanding by investors. But very ironic story, because market has grown, there are more regulation or rules being set up. And then quite ironic, as I said, a more stringent rule is occurring. And then because of that, some investors are worried about to invest in transition finance because we are seeing short-term increase of financed emissions, the words we are hearing a lot today, because the financed emission in short-term increase, investors are now wondering, can we invest in transition finance, high emitters? Even though the use of proceeds, what the companies are doing very good for the decarbonization, but still short-term increase of financed emission will be on our bank non-climate, non-financial balance sheet. What can we do? So now we are under discussion also together with public sector and then also private sector clients, how to utilize the concept of avoided emission. And it's still early stage to incorporate that concept. That it is really hard. It's really important for not only financial institutions but also corporates or the society to transform the society greener or more sustainable. So I'd like to discuss further afterwards, but this is the current situation. So the market is still at early stage, and then there are so many things to improve, to discuss together among all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayashi-san. And then very much, they appreciate the updated report about the discussion in the financial institutions and the financial sector. So finally, let's move on to government sector. We have Mr. Shinichi Kihara. He's the Deputy Director of Global Environment Issues from METI. So let's listen to his perspective on this concept of avoided emissions. So Mr. Kihara, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Arima-sensei, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shinichi Kihara, DDG in charge of environment policy and climate policy in METI. I'm very excited to participate in this session focusing on this mitigation contribution concept. Last year, towards the COP26 in Glasgow, we saw international rush for raising ambition. And today, more than 140 countries have announced 2050 net zero emission or carbon neutral national targets. Now, having set the ambitious targets, we have to focus on the action on how to reach those targets. And in Japan, we see this as opportunity to realize the green transformation. This means meeting the double goal of net zero emission and growth simultaneously. But in reality, the challenge is wider, deeper, and complex now. In addition to cleaner power generation mix, we need to heavily decarbonize industry sector, especially the hard-to-abate sector, and also create a new market design where green product and service is seen as a value from customer, from consumer and producer and financiers. So EU is brushing up their EU ETS system. United States is going for demand pull approach through FMC and also government procurement, and also provides large incentives supporting cleaner products and service under their Inflation Reduction Act. And Japan set up the GGX League to facilitate green market design driven by ambitious private sectors. In our journey of green transformation, there are many common challenges. Many basic tools and rules are still missing, including the definition of the green product or evaluation or collection of data. So we find active discussion now in G7, UNDP, and many other international venues on industrial decarbonization, comparative study on various climate policies, setting definition on zero-emission materials, etc. And among these discussions, one of the very important concepts missing is the evaluating the mitigation contribution. We fully respect the well-established GHG protocol. This captures the emission throughout the value chain. However, the mitigation contribution should also be highlighted as value. In addition to minimizing the risk of greenhouse gas emission, maximizing the contribution side of mitigating economy, social-wide emission will be a strong driver for the entities to compete and innovate towards the less emission technologies, product, and solutions. So METI welcomes the initiatives in the private sector, just like we saw or heard in this session, trying to address this issue, and eager to support from policy side to establish some evaluation method of the mitigation contribution. And I can say Japan itself, as a country, is also best model of mitigation contribution. Japan accounts for only 3% of global GHG emission, but we have been and will continue to be providing technological and innovative solution for global GHG reduction, including through technologies on hydrogen, ammonia, carbon recycling, nuclear, energy efficiency, renewable energy, etc., etc. So, and even more or less, G7 countries have the similar role. So Japan, as the G7 presidency next year, is eager to highlight the importance of mitigation contribution in our agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kihara-san, for your very much thoughtful presentation and then the perspective of the government sector. And it seems to me that there is a unanimous consensus here. There is a great potential for the concept of mitigation potential or avoided emission or saved emission or say mitigation contribution. So now let's discuss the potential, how can I say, barriers or issues to be addressed. And first of all, let me give a floor to Mr. Barker. And then, as pointed out by Mr. Ogawa, international collaboration, or how can I say, the alliance is quite important. And WCSD, it seems to me that in the best position to explore this idea. So could you please tell us what is the current situation for elaborating this idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the situation is very positive. There's a number of companies that have highlighted the need to work on avoided emissions. We actually had started a while ago to bring 40 organizations together, a number of companies with an advisory board from NGOs to look at what are actually the guidelines for companies when they think about avoided emissions. And there's a couple of elements that will come out of that work that describe how should a company prioritize avoided emission solutions in their strategies. So to help companies prioritize and then execute on those. But the second element in that work, we'll talk about what does it take to have an eligible solution. So what solutions would actually quantify as avoided emissions? And there's a few of those. You know, the company as a whole has to have a commitment that is aligned with science-based targets or the 1.5 degree, because you cannot claim to have avoided emissions if you're not serious on the overall goal. The product or the solution that the company wants to bring to market has to be a 1.5 degree solution type of product, and then there needs to be this metric or the methodology. And that part requires many companies to work together. Panasonic or Schneider Electric, they will all have their views which of their products or solutions have avoided emissions. But if we do not get one methodology, one metric, we can never compare one company to the other, and capital market players or policymakers will not be able to regulate. I think there will be a piece of work coming up relatively soon where indeed we will try to organize a number of companies to start work on this. There's already a number of initiatives in sectors. And you mentioned the work that is going on in the IEC, but eventually we need to drive it to a global standard that will be applicable across sectors. Because again, capital markets will want to see where are the avoided emissions most impactful, and then we can work with METI and with governments around the world to say how should we translate this or embed this then into the climate policies and the regulations that the governments can put in place. And then lastly, and that's going to be then a next phase of the work, once we have methodology and metrics agreed so that companies can begin to drive their product development accordingly, then we need to find a way to get that data into a system like the ISSB or the TCFD, so that indeed the communication to financial markets will then also be comparable and therefore can be put into the capital allocation models. So the status is there's a guidance coming up on what is eligible solutions for avoided emissions. The next stage will be what is the work on the methodology, the calculation, the metrics, and then the third stage will be, and how do we integrate it into external disclosures so that other stakeholders can actually verify and integrate it into their own models.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bakker. So now let me move on to Mr. Denley. And, as you can imagine, whenever this sort of novel idea come up, there could be a criticism of greenwashing or, double counting or something like that. So how do you avoid the criticism of so-called greenwashing about this idea of avoided or saved emissions?
Yeah, thank you very much. So indeed, this is a key topic, and this is probably one of the biggest reasons. Of course, I'm not talking about the impact here, but why we need to have clear rules of the game on avoided emissions, so that there is no suspicion of wrongdoings in that area. So, in terms of eligible solutions that a company like Schneider has today, to give you a few numbers, we have hundreds of solutions. So most of these solutions would contribute or are designed to contribute to more energy efficiency in the systems. The difficulty that we have, and not to fall into that trap of greenwashing, is how do we actually prove the point, right? So there is a very big disconnect today because of lack of measurement, because lack of clarity and lack of recognition between the, let's say, the volume of solutions readily available that actually do the job. So it's not as if nothing was happening. It's happening through installation of more innovative solutions. The challenge that we have is to make sure that in any kind of declaration that will be put forward to, let's say, to bring value on the portfolio of a company, we need to be absolutely ready and able to prove the point. Otherwise, it's open door to greenwashing. So at Schneider, we are very, very cautious with this. We've been working on this topic for many years. We are eager to move into the direction of more clarity, more standardization. We believe that it's through real-life examples, through coalitions with other companies that we will be able to, let's say, to converge at some point. But it's really, really important not to fall into the trap of theoretical avoided emissions, and then otherwise it's open door to everything that you said, which is double counting, greenwashing, or other things like that. So for us, careful approach. We see this really as a value. We see this as a business opportunity for the companies who will be capable to differentiate themselves in terms of innovation for the future. Innovation will bring progress, but it needs to be recognized properly and mapped properly to avoid any kind of wrongdoings or false expectations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denali. So now let's ask a question to Mrs. Hayashi. And then we have heard a lot of expectation towards capital market or financial market. And from the perspective of financial market or financial institutions, what needs to be done so that this concept of avoided emissions could be utilized by financial institutions? What kind of elements needs to be fleshed up?
Thank you very much, Arima-sensei, with a tough question or a difficult question. But I strongly believe that, and then also everybody here agree that all the stakeholders should have the consensus or agree, including financial institutions, corporate regulators, policymakers should have consensus on the measures or the way of disclosure and so on. And then as Mr. Barker or Mr. Denry said, that it is very important to have standardized rules with transparency and then also comparability to avoid greenwashing. In US already, greenwashing is a really deal. And then some of the financial institutions have been already penalized for greenwashing. So we are so cautious about greenwashing. But anyway, there are many initiatives to support to transition finance and so on. But and then we are now under discussion with not only ICMA but Glasgow Financial Alliances, Net Zero, G-Funds, and the PCAF, and so on, how to calculate the financed emissions. And then also avoided emission discussion has already started. And then also WBSCD, we need to collaborate together, including public sector people, because only private sector initiatives are not satisfactory enough to change the world. So the collaboration among all the stakeholders is critical, to be honest. And then this is a great opportunity for me to have discussion with you. And then also this kind of discussion should be held not only in Japan, but also international participants should be involved. And then it will be a great opportunity for Japan to talk about this topic in G7 and G20, and then also COP20 in the next month. That's my view.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hayashi, for encouragement to the public sector. Now, let me move on to Mr. Kihara. And it is very much conceivable that this idea could be easily mixed up with NDC, National Determined Contribution under the Paris Agreement, and this could easily lead to a criticism of double counting or something. So how to separate this idea between NDC and avoided emissions? Do you have any perspective?
Yes, thank you, Arima-san. Yes, when we discuss on mitigation contribution, there are several frequent confusion happen, and one of it is the difference between NDC and the mitigation contribution. But I can already point out three frequent confusion we walk into. The first one is the relation between the mitigation contribution and scope 1, 2, 3. We understand that mitigation contribution is independent to the GHG protocol's scope 1, 2, 3 accounting. We are talking about separate value. Some people says, for example, amount of mitigation contribution by a company should be deducted from scope 3 emission of that company. But we think that's not true. Imagine the heat pump manufacturer sells heat pump to the consumer living in a home equipped with gas heating system, and the heat pump contributes to the consumer's emission reduction a lot. The reduction because of the consumer moving out of gas heating system has nothing to do with the heat pump manufacturer's value chain. So mitigation contribution focuses on the difference between the alternative scenario and existing pathways, and evaluate the impact to society and economy beyond the company's supply chain. So that's the first confusion. And second confusion is the mixing up with NDC, the nationally determined contribution, or and the mitigation contribution. But I will say NDC is dealing with economy-wide emission within national border. On the other hand, the mitigation contribution is dealing with the impact of private entity beyond scope 1, 2, 3 emission and can go beyond national border. Therefore, mitigation contribution and NDC should be handled as mutually independent concepts. And third confusion is the double counting between upstream and downstream of value chain, cannibalization within the value chain. And imagine a steel company manufactures some innovative, high-quality electromagnetic steel, which contributes to powerful, lightweight motors. And that motor contributes to a super long-range electric vehicle. So the consumer who has been driving an old combustion engine car buys this EV, and significant emission reduction happens. Then, do we dice up the amount of reduction and allocate that between the steel company, motor company, and automobile company? Further discussion is needed, but my view is that each company can claim full amount of reduction as their contribution, because that is the impact of their product at their level. And it is a value they are adding. It is similar to thinking like all three companies' stock price rises. That's fine, along with the value they bring in at each part of the supply chain. So when a rugby team wins, all players deserves gold medal, and you don't cut one medal into pieces. So that's how we see this. So all these confusion can easily occur still, and it is useful for experts to further work on the idea, starting from stock taking the discussion in different venues, and find common understanding of the mitigation contribution, and streamline the potential confusion. So under the GX League framework, number of Japanese companies are discussing the mitigation contribution concept, and also WBCSD, in your organization, companies are seriously discussing about the avoided emission. So METI is very happy to facilitate such intellectual discussion and exercise, and eventually come up with a practical tool useful to various entities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kihara. And we have heard many points such as methodology or data or how can I say, the avoidance of very much easy confusion and so on, and the importance of the active discussion among stakeholders. So now let me come back to Mr. Ogawa. Having heard so many comments and suggestions, what is your future work plan for making this idea fly?
Actually, this talk encourages me a lot because, so as Kihara-san mentioned, sometimes avoided emission talking make a misunderstanding, a mess up or something. But the basic concept is quite simple. We try to enhance the good behavior of the good company to accelerate the carbon neutral as soon as possible to get the good reputation and also the incentive that the company to continue to invest the new technology and new good behavior. So the important thing here is, the absolute amount of emission is a on value chain emission, so that we should think separately the avoided emission effect and also the absolute emission amount. So that's one very first point. And how we can pile up the avoided emission effect as much as possible, as soon as possible, and how to enhance that kind of behavior of the good companies under the fair and transparent standardized methodology. It's really, really key that the Baka-san pointed out. And in addition to that, I really encourage that the WBCSD has a great role to accelerate these activities. Recently we have joined WBCSD at last, and play actively with your working team, and pretty much we have a great discussion to align your higher policy and our sectoral, individual standardized way. Now we're going to have started good, alignment association or good alignment discussion. So I really appreciate about WBCS lead, and with the government lead and also the financial coalition, we can do the carbon neutral activity more positive way and a more effective way for the future society, I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, I think it is time to sum up the discussion. And thank you very much, all the panelists, for your excellent contribution. And let me sum up this way. Paris Agreement, we are living in the Paris world. Paris Agreement constitutes a multi-layer framework for combating climate change, where all the stakeholders, namely national and local government, private enterprises, consumers, and civil societies, are expected to play active role for climate mitigation all over the world. While national governments address their NDCs, national determined contribution, namely production-based greenhouse gas emissions within the national border, this is not the whole story of global endeavor for climate mitigation. In fact, ultimate solution for climate mitigation calls for emergence of low or zero emission technologies, as well as products and technologies contributing to substantial emission reduction throughout the value chain. The activities of private entities are not limited within national border. Through global supply chain, they procure raw materials and intermediate products from all over the world and produce goods within and beyond national border and sell them through B2B and B2C transactions. Very complicated. So this is why Greenhouse Gas Protocol, GHG Protocol, to capture Scope 1 to 3 emissions. The mainstream framework today focuses on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions throughout the value chain, namely Scope 1 to 3 of a certain organization or entities. And it is important to accelerate such efforts as emphasized by Mr. Baka. However, as pointed out by Mr. Ogawa and other speakers as well, GHG protocol does not capture companies' mitigation contribution beyond their scope 1 to 3 emissions. The perspective of how much a certain organization or entity contributes to the mitigation is important as well. And for example, as say exemplified by Mr. Kihara, a company A replace gas heating with heat pump air conditioner produced by company B. Scope 1 to 3 emissions of company A will certainly decrease. However, as company B expands its sales of the heat pumps to its customers, scope 1 to 3 emissions of company B itself will increase. This shows the limitation or drawbacks of the scope 1 to 3 approach and necessity of evaluating global value, evaluating the mitigation contribution as well. And given increasing complex global supply chain as a nexus in global value chain, such contribution should be properly measured and acknowledged. And such acknowledgement will further incentivize production of goods and services with low and zero emissions. In this regard, the Panasonic Green Impact Initiative presented today, and very much similar idea presented by Schneider and also WBCSD, is very, very relevant. This concept, which may be called either mitigation contribution or avoided emissions or even scope 4, is still in the nascent stage and calls for further elaboration. There was a unanimous agreement in this session that mitigation contribution offers opportunities and incentives to private entities to produce and diffuse cleaner goods, services, and technologies to the global supply chain, thereby contributing to the ultimate objective of the Paris Agreement. And of course, there are a lot to be done for making this concept fly. They include first, identification of products or sectors where this concept should be concretely applied. And second, elaboration of methodology for setting a baseline with environmental integrity to avoid any criticism of greenwashing or something like that. And also ensuring independence from scope 1 to 3 emission calculation. These two concepts are completely different. Standardization of definition and also securing data transparency. There are many things to be done. And international partnership, as emphasized by Mr. Ogawa, by interested private entities is crucial. And it is very encouraging that business organizations such as WCSD has already launched the concrete work for freshening up this idea. And also Panasonic and Schneider Electric are actively working to this end. The role of financial institution is also very much important. If the financial sector recognize this concept as an important driver for encouraging companies to produce and diffuse green and low carbon technologies, then financial resources could be further mobilized to this direction. And in this regard, financial institution, the financial sector should also be involved in further elaboration of this concept. And we need to be attentive so that this concept would not be subject to criticism of double counting or greenwashing. In addition, this concept should not be misused in a way that entity are producing green, so-called green products with very high carbon intensive process publicize their mitigation contribution at the end stage. So in this regard, we should not mix up this concept with NDC. NDC is as clearly elaborated by Mr. Kihara. NDC is dealing with production-based economy-wide emissions within national border. On the other hand, this concept is dealing with impact or contribution by a private entity beyond its scope 1 to 3 emissions and could go beyond a national border. Therefore, mitigation contribution or avoided emissions and NDC should be handled as mutually independent concepts. Finally, it should be further elaborated how the public and the private sector will play a role in developing this concept. While private sector is further elaborating this idea through international partnership and so on, a government could acknowledge its potential and encourage such endeavor so that private entities could maximize their ingenuity for contributing to mitigation beyond their own value chain. And Japanese government is hosting a G7 next year. So we very much hope that Japanese government could sound out the idea of mitigation contribution or mitigation avoided emissions in various international fora, including G7 next year. So I think perhaps that is a last summary of the discussion of this session. And again, thank you very much for all the speakers for your excellent contribution. So that ends this session. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Arima, and all the panelists. Thank you very much.